Welcome, Wildcats, to a Selection Sunday version of our Instant Reaction Show. I'm your host, Colby Peterson, and we've got a couple of special guests today. We have with us, of course, AC here. How's it going, AC?
What's up, my man? Happy to be here.
Good. And we've got the Big Sky Podcast Network podfather, none other than Chris Hammond from the Tubs at the Club podcast. Great Wildcat Rack shirt, by the way. And
it's my
also
favorite store.
Yeah, and the FCS Fans Nation podcast. Chris is all over, and great to have you here, man. Thanks for coming on.
I'm happy to be here. I just had to do the national take. It'll be fun to kind of do that, but keep it Big Sky centric. And my team I'll be pulling for come this playoff season.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to talk a little bit about this Selection Sunday. I think that the feeling in Ogden and among Wildcat Nation is not a very happy one, but we're going to talk a little bit about the way that the bracket shook out. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these other matchups across the country and what they could mean. And then, of course, we want to talk a little bit more about how things shook out the way that they did. So, but before we get that, we want to remind everybody, if you are interested in getting more content like this, feel free to subscribe to the podcast. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Good place to get our weekly show and our game day show that go live every Saturday. And we're also, of course, on social media. That's where you're seeing this now. So check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, especially on game day. Twitter's the best place to interact with the Weber State Weekly team. So, guys, now I want to go to kind of initial reactions, right? Like, we're all, alumni of Big Sky schools. And so let's talk about it. When you saw the results come across the screen on ESPNU this morning, kind of how are you feeling? Give me your initial takes. AC, let's start with you.
Wow. I'm trying to think of a good word. We'll say surprised. We'll say surprised. So, I mean, seeing Jacksonville State come up as the number 4 seed, which is really where I had Weber State targeted as. I thought that they were going to be the 4 seed, maybe in some crazy scenario they could potentially be a 3 seed. I didn't see it. Some people did. But the 4 seed is really where I was thinking. And, I mean, once we saw Sam Houston State come in at the number 2 seed, I knew we were going to be in for a day. Like, it was going to be crazy. And the committee doesn't care about what anybody else outside of that room thinks. And so I was very surprised to see what happened with Weber. The team, I can't imagine, is very happy about the result. But you know what? It's a crazy spring season. It's going to be a crazy playoffs, and crazier things have happened than potentially seeing Weber State make a run here in the playoffs. So it's they've got the odds stacked against them a little bit. It's not the outcome they would have liked to see, but here we are. Playoff time, baby. I'm excited for it. Nothing like it.
Yeah, definitely not exactly what we had hoped for, but it is what it is now. Chris Hammond, what about you as you saw the results come across the screen today?
Yeah, I had Weber State penciled in at my 4, and I actually thought that was more because I thought the bracket was going to go super regionalized, which actually shocks me that Jacksonville State and Sam Houston are kind of where they are where they are. Everything we'd heard was it was going to be very regionalized, and they kind of did that in the matchups, but I thought they'd do the whole bracket. So I thought Weber State was going to be the 4, even though I thought they're probably, in my opinion, probably the second best team behind South Dakota State. But they wouldn't put them at the 2 because they want to keep it Western. But then they didn't do that anyways, so I was shocked. But I think you're seeing, and I know we kind of talked pre-show about this, name recognition-wise. At the end of the day, if you look at this, South Dakota State is the only team in the bracket who has not played in a national title the past decade. So Sam Houston does have a little bit of that name recognition. Jacksonville State has a little bit of that name recognition, and obviously James Madison. So they did benefit from that, where Weber did not. But I think the Big Sky got shafted. I think they are in. I think Eastern got a favorable break against North Dakota State, which is probably a very unpopular opinion outside of.
How funny is that, by the way?
Yeah, it's
they got a favorable matchup against North Dakota State. That's just crazy to say.
Wild words,
Sorry,
yeah, wild words.
Which I doubt the spread's going to come out that way. So I think NDSU will be favored in this. It is going to be in Fargo, but yeah, I think Weber. I said the thing that scared me about Weber is kind of these run-heavy teams, and I think Southern Illinois is that team that's really going to test if Weber can really shut down a team that's also going to try to control the pace of the game, because they've done great shutting down passing attacks all year. I don't think Southern Illinois is going to do that, even though they were just in a barn burner of basically a playoff game against Southeastern Louisiana State, or Southeast Louisiana, whatever, the Lions. But I think at the end of the day, I was very happy when the 4 seeds came out, even though I did think Weber got shafted. But I was like, okay, the committee is going for, we're going to make this the best 4 teams, and we're going to make sure we get all our teams in there. And then Weber gets Southern Illinois draw. You get 5 teams from the Missouri Valley. They make up 31.25% of the bracket. They got 4 of the 6 at-large bids, so 66.66%. It just seems high to me. I know UC Davis possibly, I've heard, actually opted out, which would make me feel a lot better of them not being included even in the last 4 in. But I just don't think Missouri State or Southern Illinois, in my bracket, I had them slashed as one of those 2 teams was going to make it. I did not think both of them made it. So for me, the bracket was a pleasant surprise to begin, and then absolutely just started to enrage me as the rest of these matchups came out. I mean, we touched on it. JSU and JMU, what a path. They got set up so easy compared to everybody else. I mean, crap, I feel bad for Sam Houston. They're going to get stuck playing either Eastern or North Dakota State. That's not going to be fun either. So, yeah, not super great, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, you're going to have to beat every team they put in front of you anyway. So if you're a Weber State, or we have some Eagles fans tuning in, I don't know. At the end of the day, you're going to have to beat people. So this time you're just going to have to beat people, but not at home as long.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris, that Big Sky definitely didn't get a lot of love in this one. The Missouri Valley Conference, of course, got quite a bit. Like you said, 5 total bids. 4 out of 6 of the at-large bids went to them, and so just a stunning number there. But I think that it's also kind of maybe creating, it seems like already from these early reactions this morning, creating some kind of solidarity among the Big Sky Conference schools, whether that be Eastern Washington fans, Weber State fans, or just fans of Big Sky football in general, feeling maybe a little bit snubbed by the way that the committee treated the Big Sky Conference this year and the love that was given to certain other conferences. So I think the big thing here is that maybe the Big Sky team should take that as a little bit of a motivation to go out and prove that maybe, like we've talked about a little bit on Weber State Weekly, that the Big Sky is a lot better than maybe some folks they're giving them credit for. And because there's no non-conference schedule in the spring season, it's tough to delineate that. So people are sort of resorting to maybe some of their worst biases in this case, and they're just not getting the love.
And I love Brent Speechley in your guys' comments right now. 100% right. Whatever. Montana fans already think I hate them, so I'll just ride with it here. Haslam must have just not done anything in this meeting. The fact that he let Eastern Washington get set up with North Dakota State, which I think is favorable, but still, you thought that was a way to go and benefit your conference. And then the Weber State matchup, they get, in my opinion, one of the 2 teams that they absolutely did not want to see, the other being South Dakota State. Did Haslam, just because Montana wasn't playing, just phone it in? It feels like Haslam did very little fighting for the conference. It feels like we got shafted. And then you look at the Missouri Valley, Missouri State has somebody on the selection committee. Weird. They got in, but yet the Big Sky felt like nobody was fighting for them in that room.
A 4-loss Missouri State, by the way.
Yeah. So it just felt like the Missouri Valley had some people fighting for them on their behalf, and the Big Sky did not. So I don't know how and when the selection committee people are readdressed from each conference, but I would be curious to hear from Haslam on what he did in that, because it felt like he did nothing. It felt like he just said, whatever you guys think about the Big Sky, my team just played Portland State and Central Washington. So I wasn't even aware there was a season this year. My bad, guys. I missed this, Evite. That's what it feels like.
Whoops. And of course, they did get a shout out on the selection show broadcast about how, they've been doing some stuff up there in Missoula. So let's talk. I was also going to say one other thing, folks, that with Missouri State, that was an eyebrow raiser, like AC noted, 4 losses for that school. But I believe those 4 losses are spanned over the fall and spring season. So maybe the additional games might have helped them kind of, but still 4 losses is 4 losses, right? Gosh.
4 is, it's actually funny because 4 is the same number of Big Sky Conference championships that Weber State's won in a row, and that apparently didn't do them any favors. So
did not, it seems. But we have some, speaking of Big Sky Conference champions, we have a clip from Coach Jay Hill today after the results were announced and Selection Sunday was over. I did a little bit of a press conference with everybody to talk a little bit about the reaction. And so we've got a clip for you to see what Jay Hill thought about the results of the show. Hopefully.
Yeah, I'm getting no audio.
Nope. Well, we'll have to maybe come back to that when we get a chance, guys. But yeah, we can't hear the audio. So let's come back to it then. Maybe we can figure that one out. But
so, I mean, well, paraphrasing what he said, and we can come back to it because I certainly don't want to put any words into Jay's mouth, but I mean, paraphrasing what he said was, every team is good, and we're looking forward to the matchup against Southern Illinois, which at this point, that's all you can do. And it's easy for fans and even for players, I think, to kind of feel disrespected and get hung up on the fact that, we're the 8th seed. Like, we just ran the table, won our 4th consecutive Big Sky Conference championship, and we're the 8th seed. Like, that feels funky. And kind of going off of that as well, there are 2 teams that have multiple losses that are seeded higher than Weber State. You had North Dakota State, who is essentially the 7 seed, and Jacksonville State, who's the 4 seed. And so having multiple teams with multiple losses ahead of you, this team has to feel disrespected. I've heard from a couple of sources inside the team that they do in fact feel very disrespected, and they say that it's motivation for them. But I'll tell you what, you look at the Massey ratings, which it's a computer. It eliminates all bias, and people have issues with that going back to the BCS and in FBS, right? That people have issues with that. But you look at that completely unbiased system that they have, ranking the strength of schedule, and Weber State had by far the highest strength of schedule out of any undefeated team. They were, as of last night, they had like the 28th, I think, highest strength of schedule in the entire nation. Sam Houston State was the next highest, and they came in at 52. And so what that says to me is that this committee didn't value strength of schedule at all. What they did value was putting points on the scoreboard, and that's not something that Weber State did very well this year. But Weber State, according to a non-biased Massey rating system, had the toughest strength of schedule by far out of any undefeated team in the entire nation. And so it's tough for Wildcat Nation to look at this and think, wow, really? I mean, you're going to put all those teams ahead of us when we had a much better resume than a lot of people are giving them credit for? I can't help but feel like Wildcat Nation is taking this one pretty hard.
So I got a quick question for you guys then. Obviously, Weber State probably the 5th team there, like just missing out on the seeding. Who do you think, if you were the committee, who are you taking out and putting Weber in?
Of the top 4?
Yes.
Jacksonville State.
Colby?
Yeah, so I think I have to agree there because it was clear that South Dakota State was going to be the number 1 team. Having JMU up there, they've got the resume. I mean, when we talk about strength of schedule, it wasn't necessarily there, but that's kind of the CAA for you. So them being up there at the top, like, I get it. When I get to Jacksonville State, I'm obviously a little bit skeptical of like, okay. And then of course, giving the number 3 or the number 2 seed to Sam Houston, like, I think that's earned. I think it's, sort of, because I see Sam Houston as maybe sort of in that position that Weber State was in a couple of years ago, getting the number 2 seed going into the playoffs. They had sort of proved it. And, maybe they deserve that. But yeah, I think I have to agree with AC that once you get to that 4 seed, it can kind of go a number of ways. And the chips didn't fall for Weber State. They ended up going Jacksonville State. And so that's what it was. But falling all the way to 8.
Yeah, Jacksonville State kind of, I don't know, they beat an FBS team, hung against Florida State. I think they are probably one of the top 4, but I kind of agree with you guys. If anything, unbiased,
Two
everything
losses.
aside, I would have taken out James Madison. That's my opinion. But I think you're both undefeated. Like you guys touched on their strength of schedule compared to your strength of schedule. I think you guys get that 3 seed, but move you to 4 and you move Jacksonville State to 3 and keep Sam Houston at 2, if that was me. But
So I want to get to Colin Thompson's question. Colin asked, do you think the close games for Weber hurt them? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely yes. If Weber State ended up winning some of these games by 2+ touchdowns, and I mean, I'm thinking back, and I think they only won the first game against Idaho State by multiple touchdowns. But if Weber State ends up winning by 2+ touchdowns in every single one of their games, then I don't know how you turn them away. And I get the logic. Like, they were close games against teams that don't really stand out, close games against SUU, close games against NAU. I get it. But I mean, at the end of the day, that is exactly what cost them, is the fact that they didn't blow teams out. And this is something I was saying on our podcast a few weeks ago, prior to the SUU game, was that Weber State needed to come out and just absolutely thump SUU and Idaho State in the season finale in order to improve the resume, and they didn't do it, and that's what ended up coming back to bite them in the butt. So for me, the logic of putting in a 2-loss team or multiple 2-loss teams ahead of Weber State, who's undefeated, who has the name recognition, who has the experience, returning tons of talent from a 2019 semifinalist, maybe it'll click later in the week, but here where we're, just an hour or so after the selection show, it's not clicking right now.
Yeah. So it looks like we may have gotten that video fixed up. So we're going to try and go back to that now and hear words straight from Jay Hill after the selection show was over. Nope.
Jay Hill just wants his comments to remain a mystery.
Yeah, it looks like we still aren't, the video's playing, but we're not able to get the audio. So AC sort of wrapped it up earlier, talking about, kind of what Coach Hill said. Of course, every team that's in the playoff is good. You're just going to have to go out there and prove it on the field. And
he made an interesting comparison to this year's March Madness tournament, comparing it to UCLA, who was one of the first 4. They were in the first 4. They were the 11th seed, and they got into the tournament, and guess what? They made the run all the way to the Final Four. And so
when the ball gets kicked off on Saturday, it doesn't matter who's across from us. We got to go play our best game, because anybody in this top 16 is a good football team, and that's a guarantee. And I know Southern Illinois is going to come in battle tested, ready to go, and excited about this matchup. So we got to go show them what kind of football team we are.
Yeah. So I mean, you get into the tournament, and guess what? It's the exact same thing for everybody right now. You're playing a relatively new opponent for most teams. Everybody's in this thing. Everybody's got the same chance, and it's one game at a time, right? The old cliche. So I have heard from multiple sources inside the team that they're not happy with the draw, but at this point, you just got to turn your eyes to Southern Illinois, and you got to focus on them and hopefully, survive and advance.
Yeah. And at some point, to be the national champion, you have to beat everybody. So at the end of the day, you want that championship mentality. Doesn't matter who they put in front of you. You had to beat them all anyway. So, yeah, maybe you have the tougher road with the Southern Illinois, who probably shouldn't have gone in anyways. It's just a uniquely bad matchup, I think, for you guys. And then South Dakota State, same way. If you beat those two, who I think are the 2 teams that really could give Weber problems here, I mean, you guys, I think going into the semifinals, everybody would be saying Weber's probably the team to beat, regardless that there's no number next to their name. You guys have the best opportunity, I think, to really take care of business and then really show that the committee should have seeded you and, be a favorite come Frisco. But got to beat them.
I want to know from your perspective. You've said this a couple times, and you said it on, I think it was Big Sky Big Takes, or it might have been FCS Fans. I can't remember. But you were talking about how Weber State doesn't match up well against running teams. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, yes, because I don't think it's necessarily they match up bad. I just think Weber State's secondary and linebacker play has made it really hard for people to beat them through the air. They've held guys like Tyler Vanderwall from Idaho State below his numbers, Justin Miller below his numbers, Keandre Woodty and the NIU thing, like below their numbers. They've been able to take really good quarterbacks and make them look more average pedestrian, which is saying something because the Big Sky is that league that there's a lot of really good offenses and quarterbacks, and Weber's not that. And that's why I think Weber's won the conference 4 years in a row. Weber likes to keep the ball on the ground as much as possible, control the pace of game, control possession. I think what could give Weber fits is having a team that has that similar mentality of control the ball, control the tempo, and try to win the possession game. That is a team that I think Southern Illinois is able to do. Not quite as good as a team like South Dakota State with Pierre Strong Jr., where South Dakota State is going to try to do that. All their passes are going to be set up through play action. It's going to be basically you guys are going to face almost carbon footprints of yourself, which AC, I think it was you or Colby actually said on Big Sky Big Takes. It's the main game all over again, right?
It's the main game, right?
That's what I think the issue is for you guys is the possibility of like, don't get out Webered. Like you guys are Weber State. It's your brand of football. Don't let somebody else do it to you. And I think you just have two teams in South Dakota State and Southern Illinois, probably the only two teams on the entire bracket that do that. And they just happen to be against you guys. I think you match up really well against Sam Houston, really well against JSU, really well against Eastern. NDSU might have been able to give you some fits, but I don't think they're going to get past Eastern. Certainly not to Frisco. You guys you match up well against almost everybody except Southern Illinois and South Dakota State, and that's who you got. So we'll see.
So I think I might disagree with you a little bit there because Southern Illinois, they do average 200 yards on the ground per game, which, I mean, that's excellent. But guess what? They also give up 200 yards on the ground per game. And guess what Weber State likes to do on offense? They like to run the ball. So I think that it's actually a little bit better matchup than you might be giving them credit for. And Weber State's defense, the run defense is only giving up 138 yards per game. The defensive tackle group is a group that many people think is good enough to be on an FBS team. Like they're very high on the defensive tackle group here at Weber State. And so I think that the Wildcats hang their hat on the secondary and the pass defense, but the run defense I think is a lot better than many people realize. So I like the matchup. It's going to be a ground and pound type game. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. So some of the comments we have in here, got one from Chris Ferre saying, let's make the national championship game a Big Sky championship game. Go Wildcats, go Eagles. I think that, like we noted at the top, there's maybe a little bit of a snub feeling among the Big Sky faithful here. And so they will like to see both the Wildcats and the Eagles do well to kind of prove the committee wrong. Like Chris said, should the Wildcats and the Eagles win the first round, that's saying something.
That means the committee failed. That's what that means.
Yeah. Also Colin Thompson asking when tickets will be on sale. Not exactly sure, but these games are, run by the NCAA. So I'm sure it will be soon, but not exactly sure. And I'm sure that the university will be sending out emails if you're already on those, or sending out texts, or just watch their social media. But it's got to be soon, as soon as they figure out the details. I think that probably a lot of that was already in place because it was pretty sure that the Wildcats were going to get a home playoff game, at least one. So I'm sure that'll be coming up soon. Tom Lanky noting that Davis's running game was highly heralded. Alonzo Gilliam was just a great back, but Weber seemed to handle that okay. So we'll see kind of what happens. And
I still think Weber wins. I'm just saying, I think you guys would have beaten a lot of these other teams less like Weber, I guess, like by multiple touchdowns, like you did Idaho State. I could see the Southern Illinois game being one of those feels close games. I still think Weber wins it, and probably by a scoreline that won't match how the game feel is, I guess. Like I definitely pulling Wildcats should beat Southern Illinois. I just think it's uniquely not going to be as big of a win as it would have been against literally anybody else in the field.
Yeah. And, I would say, Chris, that Davis game was definitely that way. It definitely felt like Davis had maybe a lot more control over the first half into the second half. But then Weber went hurry up in that second half and really kind of turned the game on its head, took the lead, and then never gave it back, right? But it didn't feel like Weber was in the driver's seat until, much later.
Yeah.
So now, guys, we've got a segment that we're going to call winners and losers here. We're going to talk about who you think, came up in in today's bracket and maybe who got snubbed. So let's talk about winners and losers. AC, I want to start with you, man. Who's your winner? Who are your winners based on the bracket that we saw today?
Well, first winner has to be the Missouri Valley Football Conference. They were able to get, obviously it's a smaller field, significantly smaller field this season than it has been in years past due to everything going on. But Missouri Valley Football Conference was still able to get pretty much every single team in their conference in the playoffs somehow, including a 4-loss Missouri State team. So they're a big winner in this one. And then also you had Jacksonville State, who I think is another winner because they were able to get the 4 seed. And taking a look at the various brackets that were out there from Craig Haley, from Sam Herder, from various other news outlets, Jacksonville State wasn't seeded in any of them. And so I think they were a big surprise for a lot of people, not just me. And I'm not trying to hate on Jacksonville State, and I apologize if it's coming off that way. I think they're a good team. They beat an FBS team, and so there's obviously a lot of talent there. But seeing a 2-loss team ahead of a lot of other teams that were undefeated or only had 1 loss was, to me, a surprise. And for Jacksonville State, I feel like this is highway robbery. I feel like they're a big winner in this.
Chris, what about you? Who do you have as your winners from today's bracket?
Yeah, obviously Jacksonville State. That was one that not a lot of people saw coming. AC just touched on it. I do think they benefit from being 9-2. They played 11 games. They played a full season. They played in the fall. I think the committee was kind of retroactively, rewarding them for that. And one of those losses is to Florida State, which I don't have as big of an issue with JSU getting the 4 seed. Like I said, my issue is James Madison. So JSU, big winner. Missouri Valley getting 5 in, big winner. The other winner, probably Eastern Washington, just because it's so weird. I think they match up just super well against North Dakota State, where I thought they might get slumped going to North Dakota or possibly South Dakota State or Sam Houston, which I don't think they necessarily win any of those games. But for some reason, I just really like their matchup against NDSU. So I'll go JSU, Missouri Valley, and Eastern Washington.
Yeah, I think I got to agree with you there, Chris. I think that Eastern Washington's offense is going to be a very interesting matchup against the Bison in the Fargo Dome. I like the matchup, and I can't wait to see what happens. But now, guys, let's go to the other side of the coin, and let's talk about losers here. AC, let's start with you. Who do you have as your losers from today's results?
Well, I had an entire conference as a winner, and so I'm going to have an entire conference as a loser as well, and that's the Big Sky. Big Sky was responsible for half of the Final Four in 2019, 3 of the 8 quarterfinalists in 2019, and got absolutely no respect. The 4-time defending conference champion was essentially seeded as number 8, which takes me into my next loser is Weber State. I think that the committee showed an incredible amount of disrespect to the whole conference, specifically Weber State. Eastern Washington, I think, is probably more happy with their draw than Weber State is. But the fact that an undefeated conference champion is going in as the 8th seed well below a few teams that I think Weber State has an argument to be above, I think is just a gigantic slap in the face. Again, this is a conference. It's considered one of the Power 3 conferences in FCS. Had 2 of the Final Four, including Weber State, in the 2019 semifinals. Everything we had heard, everything we anticipated and expected from this FCS playoff selection show today was that the committee was going to put a little bit of respect on the brand names. And for a team that made the semifinals and made 2 quarterfinals before 2019, Weber State didn't get any of that benefit of the doubt. I think it was Ryan Foley, our friend from the R&R podcast, saying that Weber's style of winning is never going to get them any points in the committee's eyes. And you know what? That came to fruition today. We saw that today. That was the committee just saying, you know what? Weber State doesn't score enough points. And as a result, their prize for not scoring enough points is the 8th seed. So Big Sky, Weber State, big losers today.
Yeah. Should note that Ryan is, like AC said, a member of the R&R cast up there. So if you're interested in what's going on with Montana State sports, be sure to check those guys out. They'll be covering them up as the playoffs get going, but then also they'll be checking out some of the changes that have been happening up in Bozeman. So check those guys out if you're interested to see what's going on with Bobcat Nation. I got to agree with you, AC. I think that definitely the Wildcats had a little bit of a stiff draw here. Like Chris noted, so the matchups are not exactly favorable, and so should the Wildcats find a way to win the next 2 games, that just goes to show that they really wanted the thing, and that they really had one of the toughest paths to Frisco if it's really going to happen this year. Chris, I want to go to you, man. Who's your losers in this year's bracket?
Well, for one, Weber State, but you guys touched on it for all basically the reasons. But another one just to think about, which is so weird to say, North Dakota State, I think, is a big loser. You get blown out by Southern Illinois, who makes the field, obviously playing Weber State. And then you barely – it felt like they were getting dominated by SDSU, but for all intents and purposes, it was a close game. Not only if they can beat Eastern Washington, they also have a nightmare matchup against Sam Houston. So, you're talking about, how Weber kind of was put in brackets that aren't as favorable to them to win, but they're probably still favorable. NDSU has 2 matchups that are absolutely not favorable for them against Eastern, and then if they beat them, Sam Houston. So I think NDSU got also a really stiff draw in this bracket. And then you also look at, guys, the CAA champion is not the one with the 3 seed in front of it. It's Delaware.
Yeah.
So you're looking at James Madison, who didn't even win their conference. And then you're Delaware, and you're like, okay. Yes, they get matched up against Sacred Heart, but then they're going probably down to Alabama to play Jacksonville State. If you're Delaware, you're kind of like, how we win the conference in the CAA, and yet we don't get a matchup against James Madison, whose really only big win was against Richmond. So Richmond kind of a loser as well, but my big ones, Delaware and NDSU and Weber. I think they all got kind of shafted for Delaware being undefeated, Weber being undefeated, and NDSU just getting put in. It's like the committee is tired of NDSU, and so they put them in probably their toughest road to get to Frisco yet. So if NDSU and Weber meet, they will probably be the most 2 deserving teams because they absolutely earned their way there this year.
Chris, where would you have put North Dakota State?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of good room for them. I probably would have liked the Missouri Valley would have hated it, and then they would have been a loser, but you already made them a winner. I would have put NDSU versus North Dakota probably, and then probably had Missouri State versus Eastern Washington. I think you get North Dakota versus North Dakota State. You get both of them a chance at it, and then you move North Dakota State, I think, to that bracket with James Madison. But even then, you're still pissed because then it's like, all right, well, you're putting JMU and NDSU on the same side of the bracket. The teams who have represented, represented somebody in the championship 9 of the last 10 years, right? They're on the same side of the bracket and possibly meeting in the quarters. But I just think they match up better against all those teams up there, VMI, James Madison, North Dakota, than they do against Sam Houston and Eastern. So I probably would have flopped them, given Eastern Missouri State and given North Dakota a game in the Fargo Dome.
Couple of comments here, folks. Brent Speechley noting that home field is going to be big in that first game. I think I'd agree. The Wildcats are very good at Stewart Stadium, and so that is a little bit of an advantage having the Salukis on the road here in Ogden, and also noting that having Josh Davis back will be big. We've seen some good production at the running back position the last couple of weeks from Dante McMillian to Daniel Wright Jr., but having Josh Davis back in the fold will be really, really helpful, I think, going forward in that game. And then I think, Garrett Lee also agreeing with you guys that, Richmond maybe a little bit of a loser here, not making it in. I would say, though, to that they did have their destiny in their own hands yesterday, playing against James Madison and losing that in-state rivalry game. Should they have won, they probably would have been in, but they couldn't manage to do it. And so they're on the outside looking in from the couch. Also, Brent Speechley wonders, if maybe the bad blood between Weber and Montana came into play for Montana's AD, not advocating for the Big Sky more. We don't know that for sure, but it sure looks like the Wildcats and the Eagles didn't have much of an advocate in the room with 5 Missouri Valley Conference teams making the field. No one knows, but an interesting point.
That's funny, though, because it would have been good for the entire conference. Montana would have benefited from this, right? And so I think it's a little easy to speculate on that, but the logic to me is it's not there. I would imagine that – I don't think that he would have said anything that would have hurt Weber State and or Eastern Washington, right? Maybe he didn't push hard enough, but Montana pretty clearly would have been a benefactor of having Weber State and Eastern Washington make a deep playoff run. So who knows?
True. I don't think he would have been – I don't think Haslam was spiteful. Let's put it that way. I don't think he purposely tried to put like Eastern and Weber in bad situations. I agree with AC. I think it's more of just phoning it in and just not being as committed as in years past. It's no secret his entire athletic department's view on the spring season. So it could have just trickled in a little bit of that where like he did not follow as closely as he would have had it been a full Big Sky season. And I think maybe that's what hurt us. I don't think he actively is trying to spite Eastern or Weber. I just think maybe his engagement this spring hasn't necessarily been what you would have liked to have an advocate in that room.
Yeah. So now, fellas, let's, we've talked a lot about the bracket. We've talked about what it means, kind of how it could look. And so now let's look forward to next weekend. We've got a big weekend of playoff football all across the country. And so now we're going to go to predictions. And so I want to, there's a nice comment here from Colin Thompson asking about, of the top 4 seeds, which team do you think has the biggest chance of getting upset? Chris Hammond, I want to go to you first. Can you answer that question? Who do you think of the 4 who were seeded, who do you think gets upset, who or is most likely to get upset?
Well, I think all of them escaped their first round games. That's for sure. And then, man, you're really looking at it. James Madison, I really want to pick against. I don't think James Madison has proved it to me this year, but they're going to be better than Missouri State and North Dakota. Maybe Sam Houston. Probably South Dakota State, which is crazy to say at the 1 seed. But yeah, because there's your other side of the argument here. It's definitely South Dakota State because they might have to get Weber. Like we're talking about how upset you guys are about your placement. Can you imagine being South Dakota State? You get the 1 seed. You're enthusiastic about getting the 1 seed. And then you see that once you get past Holy Cross, you have to play Weber State. Like, I don't think Jackrabbit fans are super stoked about how this side of the bracket turned out either. I doubt that's who SDSU wanted to see. I think they would have rather see NDSU, Eastern, or North Dakota on that side of the bracket with them. So put yourself in the Jackrabbit shoes. Like, they're probably not thrilled either because they probably know there's a shot they lose to Weber State, even at home. So probably South Dakota State's my pick for who's most likely to lose.
Yeah, it's a good one. The one consolation that the Jackrabbits fans do have is that game will be in Brookings. And so they'll have, some home field advantage there with Wildcats on the road. And traditionally in the playoffs, Wildcats have not had a great road record in the playoffs. So AC, now let's get you maybe some of your predictions on that same question. Who of the top 4 seeds, who do you think was most likely to get upset?
I'm with Chris in the fact that I think they all get through their first round matchups. In the quarterfinals, however, I got 3 seeds on upset watch. I got 3 of them. I like the matchup. I think North Dakota State beats Missouri State, and I like that matchup, North Dakota against James Madison. James Madison has struggled mightily at times this year, and we've talked about it on our show quite a bit. They've got quarterback issues. They had to have the 4th quarter comeback against Elon, and so a lot of question marks surrounding James Madison. They haven't been playing a lot of games, obviously, so that quarterfinal matchup against North Dakota, who I think it'll be North Dakota, I like the upset potential there. The Sam Houston – there's set up. I don't know if North Dakota State gets past Eastern, which I think is going to be a tough task because Eastern Washington puts a lot of points on the board and North Dakota State, quite frankly, hasn't. And so if Sam Houston gets Eastern Washington, then I'll take Sam Houston. But if North Dakota State is against Sam Houston in that quarterfinal, I'm taking the Bison. 100% taking the Bison in that one. So I think there's potential for an upset there. And then the third one, I like Weber State's chances against the Jackrabbits. And I think the Jackrabbits are a good team. Honestly, I think they were deserving of the 1 seed. There's no bashing there. But again, that's a run-heavy team. Look at what they just did against North Dakota State. And Weber State's pretty dang good stopping the run. And so who knows? Those 3, I've got them all on upset watch. If I'm taking one to lose in the quarterfinal, To heck with it. We're taking Weber State to win the quarterfinal.
And hey, Delaware versus JSU, that's not a slouch matchup either. It's weird because like everybody, for the most part, they all have easy first round games. None of them are going to have an easy second round game. That's for sure. Whether Sam Houston is playing NDSU or Eastern, that's not fair, like fun. James Madison versus Missouri State or North Dakota, they should win, but would not be shocked if they lost. And Delaware versus JSU, Delaware is undefeated. Like, won the CAA, so technically better than JMU. They could beat JSU. And then, as we touched on, South Dakota State versus Weber, like, that's just not fun to be a Jackrabbit. Like, yeah, you're technically favored. Yeah, you're going to be at home, but that is not who you want to see in the second round either. So we could very well move in the semis with no seats left. That'd be crazy.
That would be crazy. I want to ask, though, guys, and, this is just because, for the sake of, integrity here, should the Salukis come to Ogden and win, how do you like that matchup against the Jackrabbits?
I don't. I don't. If you look at the Southern Illinois schedule, they've got 3 losses, all to playoff teams. One was South Dakota State, and South Dakota State ran rampant over the Salukis. Southern Illinois lost that game 44-3. So, South Dakota State's going to win that one.
Okay. Because I wondered, is there something that the Salukis learned from the last time facing the Jackrabbits that maybe would make them more competitive? But like we said, in this particular case, we do have some game film, and it was not favorable for the Salukis.
Yeah, like, will they lose by 41 points if they advance? No. Probably 21.
40.
Yeah, 40. Yeah, I'd go probably 3 touchdowns. They were not going to lose by 41 again. But, yeah, South Dakota State would beat Southern Illinois.
They got the number.
Imagine.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about those 4 seeds, right? We've predicted, kind of the way that you guys feel about that, feeling confident that almost probably all 4 of the 4 seeded teams will win their first round matchups. But now let's talk about the non-seeded teams, guys. Let's go through the bracket here. I want to talk Missouri State, North Dakota. North Dakota has been a very scrappy team. We're ranked all the way up to number 2 this year, I think, in the rankings. Had a good run going until they went to Fargo, and then the wheels kind of fell off. But Give me your thoughts, guys. Predict this one. Chris Hammond, I want to go to you first. How do you predict this one, this Missouri State, North Dakota matchup?
So Missouri State's been surging late. Most of their losses, all but one of their losses happened in the fall. There 2 of which to Central Arkansas, 1 to Oklahoma. They did lose 25-0 to North Dakota State, however. While impressive, while on a run, they really haven't played much of the top of this conference, which is how they kind of snuck in. I would imagine North Dakota wins this. North Dakota looked good. Like you said, at one point they were number 2. Really, their loss against North Dakota State is like the only thing really hurting them. That, and they have not played in a hot minute. So they could get caught up by the Bears in Missouri State. But I'm going to take North Dakota to probably advance in this one.
Okay. Felipe Sataki, the All-American, agrees with you in the comments that North Dakota probably winning that game. AC, what about you? Who are you taking in a Missouri State, North Dakota matchup?
Hands down, North Dakota. Missouri State, in my opinion, doesn't even – I don't think that they deserve a playoff spot. It's a talented team. It's a good team. I don't think they're a top 16 team. I just don't. And so North Dakota, they had the 1 loss against North Dakota State, which honestly, North Dakota State's down, but I still don't think there's any shame in losing to North Dakota State. And so North Dakota, to me, I think is going to run away with that one.
Okay. So both of our panel experts here taking North Dakota in that matchup. Guys, let's go now down to the bottom of the bracket, and let's talk about North Dakota State and Eastern. We've talked a little bit about this and how, some of us are feeling favorable. I noted that I felt favorable and that maybe Eastern could probably win on the road in the Fargo Dome. But let's put the formal question to you guys. Chris Hammond, who do you like in an Eastern Washington, North Dakota State matchup?
Eastern.
Likes Eastern. All right. So
you're going to give Eric Berrier a dome game, like, while he's mid-season clicking? Like, this isn't early like it was against Idaho, when, he's still trying to get in his rhythm. He's in his rhythm, and you're not going to give him any elements to deal with, like a blustery Cheney. Our joke on our Tubs of the Club show is Cheney blows because the wind is just blowing in circles.
All the time, yep.
They're going to be in a nice comfort dome. You're going to give the most likely should be Walter Payton award-winning quarterback a little bit of fan noise. Like, I like Eastern a lot in this game.
Yeah. Have to agree with you there. Barrier has really played well. Eastern, I felt, like you noted, Chris, a tough start to the season, losing to your Idaho Vandals. You were at the game in the Kibbe Dome. No Aaron Best in that game, but then they sort of started to pick it up and took care of business every single week for the following, 5 weeks after that.
Eastern undefeated with Aaron Best this season.
Yeah, and so I got to agree with you there. Plus, Eric Barrier, who is a phenomenal player, probably going to be a Walter Payton finalist at least, if not maybe even a winner of that award, which if you're not familiar, this is the Heisman Trophy for FCS football. And so I got to agree with you here, man. Like no elements, and they're very familiar with that up in Cheney, playing at home. Gosh, that's going to be tough for the Bison, who have not been able to put up a lot of points this year. AC, what about you? How you feeling about this matchup?
Well, I was going to say that something of note of Chris's pick is the fact that Chris represents Idaho in the Big Sky Podcast Network. He works for the affiliate, and Idaho saw Eastern Washington twice this year. And so Chris has watched a lot of Eastern Washington football. And honestly, so for me, I think this is a matchup thing, right? I think that North Dakota State obviously has a lot of talent. They obviously have a lot of experience, but it's a matchup, right? Eastern Washington throws the ball, and they throw it well. They've got, he very well might be the best quarterback in all of FCS football in EB3. I don't know if North Dakota State can keep up. They haven't been scoring a ton of points this year. And so, just matchup-wise, I don't think it's a good matchup for the Bison. I'm taking Eastern Washington.
Yeah, don't blame you there. Gosh, it could be a boat race up in the Fargo Dome. So now, guys, let's go to the other side of the bracket. Let's start at the top. Well, we've already talked a little bit about that. So let's actually go to the bottom, and let's talk we haven't talked a lot about this matchup. We did say that Delaware was going to, be taking on Sacred Heart and that we were confident, but like formally, let's give it, an answer. Delaware, Sacred Heart. Who do you got?
I'm taking Delaware. Though I do enjoy the NEC conference, Duquesne was the best team in that conference this year. They made a artificial championship game, and in that game, even though Duquesne had beaten Sacred Heart earlier in the year, Sacred Heart was able to pull it out against the Duquesne Dukes. So I'm not necessarily convinced that Sacred Heart is even the best team in the NEC. Meanwhile, Delaware is the best team in the CAA. So I think Delaware, this one could be including, other than probably looking at these matchups real quick, I would say other than South Dakota State probably blowing out Holy Cross, I think this game is most likely to also be not competitive. Probably the second most uncompetitive game this year for the whole tournament.
So do you also feel that VMI is going to match up decently against James Madison?
That kind of VMI is a Weber type thing, right? Like you're just not going to be able to blow them out. They're going to control the pace of the ball. They're going to limit James Madison having possessions. So I just think even though James Madison will beat VMI, I just don't think they're going to get the ball enough to make it ugly.
AC, what about you? How you feeling about this Delaware Sacred Heart game?
I like Delaware, and they're coming off a big game on the road in Philadelphia where they just beat Villanova. And Villanova hasn't played a ton of games this season, and so they were kind of they were suffering from that perspective, maybe a little bit rusty. But Delaware's a good team. They're a good team, and they're essentially the 5 seed in the whole playoffs, right? They got a lot of respect. The CAA athletic directors. There's some conspiracy theorists out there saying that the CAA athletic directors awarded Delaware the conference championship, hoping that the CAA might get 2 seeds in the tournament. And hey, it almost worked. They got 3 with James Madison and 5 with Delaware. So it was pretty close. Whether or not that was the what actually happened, that's a different discussion. But I like Delaware. I think they're a good team. They've obviously got a lot of history. I'm taking Delaware pretty big in this one.
Yeah. And then finally, guys, the last game, we've talked a little bit about this. Let's put predictions out there. Weber State Wildcats hosting the Southern Illinois Salukis. Who are you going to take, Chris Hammond?
Weber State. Southern Illinois, like I said, it's going to be, you put it very, very well. This could be almost the exact same as like UC Davis, other than I think UC Davis is a better team than Southern Illinois. So I think it's that game where it's not pretty. You're not going to blow them out. They're going to hang in there. And at the end, maybe it's only an 8-9 point win, but it just feels like you guys were in control the whole time. But they just kind of like linger, I guess. But though I do like the Salukis as a team, as an organization, I think they're on the up and up in the FCS. This year is not the year for them.
AC, what about you? Your prediction for this weekend's home playoff game in Ogden? Wildcats or Salukis?
I think Weber State's rushing attack is too good to be stopped by Southern Illinois. You look at the 3 losses they've had, pretty much everyone ran wild against Southern Illinois. Their team statistics for the season is they're giving up 200 yards on the ground every single game, and Weber State's averaging over 200 yards on the ground in every single game this season. So it's a stable of running backs that the Wildcats have. Southern Illinois hasn't proved that they're able to stop the run. Weber State has proved that they're able to stop the run. I got the Wildcats winning this one. And I think it'll be close just because I don't think Weber State has shown the propensity to maybe blow teams out. But I do have Weber State winning this one, and I think that they'll be in control for most of the game.
Okay. Yeah, I think the defense is going to come out with maybe a bit of a chip on their shoulder. That's one of our better units. And so excited to see kind of how these teams stack up against each other. All right, folks. So those are kind of our predictions thus far. We did get an interesting question come in from Brett Hine, who is the beat reporter for the Wildcats at the Standard Examiner here, our local newspaper. And I wanted to put it to our panel. Brett Hine noted that this year, Montana was the representative on the FCS committee, even though they did not play in the regular spring season. Now, they did have a couple of, games that they played outside of, a regular conference schedule, but they weren't really a part of that regular conference schedule. And so, the question is kind of like, why was Montana repping the Big Sky when they didn't play? Does it make them more of a neutral outside observer of what happened? Or I don't know. Give me your thoughts there. Chris Hammond, I wanted to start with you, see what you thought.
So how I understand is the committee's picked a couple of years in advance. Okay. So I believe this was just what it was going to be for the fall. Yeah. And I think it's been that way for a couple seasons. It's been the same amount of teams. I could be wrong on that too, but I think it's one of those things where they all move out at like a time, kind of like any kind of organization. You can only be a president for 2 years, 3 years, whatever, and then you wash out. I think that's how it is. Now, that being said, with the way the spring was, how fluid everything was, they probably should have made sure the only people they should have gone all in on every team. Every conference had basically somebody opt out, right? Mm-hmm. Have either completely teams who have opt outs as representation or teams who have opted in. Looking at that, it is kind of weird that Haslam from Montana was our representation for the Big Sky, yet probably did not pay very close attention to the Big Sky as a whole. Probably, but I don't know. That's a tough one.
We don't know. Yeah. AC, what about you? Any thoughts there on now that Chris kind of, shared with us the process? And
I think it's worth criticism because, Chris, and I get what Chris is saying. Like, that's the way they do things. They select the committees a few years in advance. Well, guess what? This year has nothing to do with the way that we've done things, right? Everything has changed this year. Everything. And so why isn't the committee up for potential change, right? Why is an athletic director or a president, whoever, of an institution who's not participating in the spring season and made it well known weeks before the spring season, why are they representing the Big Sky on the FCS Playoff Committee? I think that absolutely is worth review and worthy of criticism. It should have been who it should have been. It should have been a representative from Weber State or Eastern Washington on that committee for this spring season. I'm not saying change everything, but for this spring season, when everything is changed, when the entire establishment of FCS football, everything has gone against it, why are we keeping the same playoff committee? And why do we have people on the playoff committee who represent institutions who aren't participating in the spring season? That it doesn't make sense. And so what's the answer? Guess what? You have to make a one-off. You gotta change it up somehow, some way. Haslam's got to step out for the spring season. He can take his place in the fall again, but it absolutely should have been reviewed and it should have been taken care of before things got to where they were today. In what resulted as I think most people are pretty confused by the FCS selection show that we just watched just a little bit ago. And I think that Haslam very well played a part in that. And so I think that it should have been reviewed. It should have been changed before it got to what happened today.
Fair criticisms.
Yep. Unfortunately, now it's happened, and we're going to go back to normal, hopefully in the fall. So it is what it is. But I think I'm with you, AC. Definitely was worth maybe taking another look at because, while you're not saying change everything did change in the spring season. And so that could include members of that committee or.
Is that a sign?
Have we lost Colby?
Haslam heard him and cut him off. He's
Colby
like, that's enough.
he must have closed the door. Oh, he's
Sorry,
back.
Sorry, guys. But let's wrap this one up, guys. I was also just going to note Tom Lakey predicts a 27-16 win for the Wildcats on Saturday. So get your tickets if you're going to be in Ogden. If you're close, maybe we'll even be seeing Chris Hammond himself here in Ogden, Utah. So, Chris, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show today and just talking us through some of this. Like we said, a guy who is really plugged into FCS football nationwide, not just in the Big Sky. And so we really appreciate your insights. And, of course, AC, thanks for taking the time to talk through kind of what this means for Weber State. And we look forward to Saturday, and the matchup with the Salukis game will be at 2 p.m. and going to be on ESPN, right, fellas?
ESPN 3.
3. Okay. So we'll wrap it up like we usually do. Follow us on social media. That's where you're seeing this broadcast probably. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Twitter is one of the best places to interact with the Weber State Weekly team, especially on game day. Want to give a shout out to our sponsor, WildcatRack.com. Got a new hoodie up there right now, and they've got a couple of conference championships t-shirts in the works. So keep your eyes peeled for those because volleyball and football conference champions, and probably softball here in a couple of weeks, folks. They're a great team. Also, if you aren't subscribed to the show on your podcast feeds, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, and be sure to check out all the members of the Big Sky Podcast Network. That includes Chris's Tubs at the Club podcast, the R&R Catcast that we noted before. If you want to get more plugged into Eastern Washington, check out the Eagles Power Hour with Rusty and Kyler. And then who am I leaving out here, guys? I know I'm leaving somebody out.
Grizz Fan Pod.
Grizz Fan Pod, of course. Sorry, they will have some analysis on their what am I calling it? What did I tell Mike on the Big Sky Big Takes? Preseason games? Is that what I'm calling them out there? Preseason games.
Yeah, basically.
But they're breaking down, the things that have been happening up in Missoula. They just had a game this weekend against Portland State, and so if you're interested to know kind of how the Grizz will look, which spoiler, folks, they're going to look really good in the fall. You can find out Grizz Fan Pod what they're doing over there. So with that, we'll wrap it up like we usually do. AC, I won't make Chris do it, but I'll leave it to you. Weber State.
Great.
Go Wildcats.